Story number 1. I worked in a prestigious office located on a high floor of Nevoskrep. My days were busy with important business meetings and assignments that demanded great responsibility. I considered myself a goal-oriented businessman, fully dedicated to my work. My wife always understood the gravity of my responsibilities and supported me in everything. Although our relationship lacked warmth, her understanding was unwavering. However, one rainy evening, my mother-in-law suddenly burst into my office. She looked preoccupied and serious, which gave me an uneasy feeling. I couldn't understand what could have happened to prompt her to visit me at my workplace. "Mom, is something wrong?" I asked, expressing concern. It is not customary in our family to address in-laws as mother or mother-in-law, so I address her affectionately. "Son-in-law, I can't keep quiet anymore," she declared, her voice radiating confidence. It was obvious that she had made her decision regardless of the consequences. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" My heart raced, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Oh no, darling, I'm perfectly fine." "Thank you for your concern," my mother-in-law replied, her tone completely changed. I tried to remain calm, although deep down I knew she had come here for a reason. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the office became heavier. The walls began to feel cramped, creating a sense of confinement. "It's really hard for me to tell you this. I've been thinking about you." My mother-in-law said these words with intense delight, as if she had discovered a deep secret. Her gaze stopped on me, waiting for my consent. After a moment of complete silence, she did venture to say it. "I have feelings for you," she said hastily. To say I was shocked is to say nothing. Without giving me a chance to comprehend what she had said, she began to approach me insistently. I was perplexed and at a loss for words. "Maybe you don't understand me, but I've kept it to myself for a long time," my mother-in-law said regretfully. Suddenly, as if in an instant, the ground beneath me disappeared. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, even though the words were coming from my own mother-in-law. For a moment, it felt like a part of me belonged to her forever. "Are you sure?" I managed to utter, but my voice was barely audible. Instead of answering with words, she conveyed her intentions with actions. It soon came to my attention that all of this was unfolding in my office. I tried to free myself from her tight grip, but she pulled me even tighter against her. Desire was building to the point where we gave into it. Having had experience with an older woman, I realized that it was the right decision. Story number 2. Mark initially reacted negatively to the news that he would have to visit his mother-in-law's country residence. Such an event was repeated every year. He was silently angry about it. His wife and mother-in-law asked him every year to help harvest the crops that grew in abundance in the vegetable gardens, bushes, and trees at Ashley's home. In his opinion, all those fruits, vegetables, and berries should have been bought at the store rather than spending the best and warmest days of the year growing and tending them. However, the women members of his family treasured what they grew with their own hands. So Mark had to put up with the situation and only occasionally lend a helping hand to his female relatives. It was on that day, when she tried hard to convince her husband once again to help her mother, there was an unfortunate twist of fate. The girl fell ill, her temperature rose quickly, and it became obvious that Mark would have to go alone. It was too late to refuse, for they had already committed themselves to help, and Ashley's huge plantation was filled with ripe fruit that was about to spoil. After assuring himself that his wife's illness was not severe and that she could handle the treatment, Mark hurriedly got into the car and drove out in the late afternoon. Mark reached the village late in the evening, close to 2 o'clock in the morning. The traffic jams had left him frustrated, especially since his plans for the weekend were not going according to plan. In addition, his mother-in-law took her time opening the gate, a habit that always annoyed Mark. He had to call her cell phone to wake her up. Despite his good relationship with her, these delays always got on his nerves. "You could have waited for me," he muttered quietly as he heard the deadbolt unlock. Ready to air his grievances, Mark was surprised by his mother-in-law's appearance. Ashley greeted him, in a nightgown that showed off her beautiful legs because of its short length. "Hi, Mark. I'm sorry for the delay. I couldn't find my keys anywhere." "No worries. Let's get some rest," muttered the man, keeping his gaze on her feet. Mark, having enjoyed a full night's sleep, got out of bed around noon. There were undeniable benefits to visiting the village. The tranquility and fresh air, unlike the bustling city, gave him a much-needed boost of energy. Ashley understood his need for rest after an exhausting week and the start of a new job, so she refrained from bothering him. She always felt bad because she could see and understand that he wasn't thrilled with this kind of help. However, she deeply appreciated his efforts to please her, so she reciprocated. By the time her son-in-law came out of the guest bedroom, a delicious and hearty breakfast was waiting for him. "If I eat all this, I won't be able to work," he exclaimed delightedly. He was in a nicer mood now than he had been the night before. "Feel free to eat as much as you like. I won't be offended." "Whatever you say." "What are our plans for today?" "I suggest we start with apples and then move on to vegetables. But we can decide as we go along. By the way, the river is unusually warm right now. I swim there every day, so I highly recommend going there towards the end of the day." "Oh, that's a great suggestion. I really like swimming." "Okay, I'll leave you to it. Finish your food and go outside." The day flew by so fast that Mark didn't even notice. Numerous baskets, bags, and other containers were filled with ripe fruit. In fact, the man even exceeded his mother-in-law's plan for the day. Her presence played a part in this accomplishment. Ashley was dressed in short shorts and a tight t-shirt on this hot day. Mark had always found her attractive, but now he couldn't take his eyes off this energetic and mature woman. "Thank you, Mark. You've been a great help to me." "You're welcome. I'll continue my work tomorrow before I leave." "Great. By the way, do you remember the way to the river?" "I've already forgotten it. Could you please show me the way?" Soon, the mother-in-law and son-in-law set off in the right direction and arrived at the place in 10 minutes. It was a secluded piece of paradise surrounded by trees and thickets. A perfect place for those who like to sunbathe and swim in privacy and tranquility. "It's a beautiful place," Mark said. "Oh God, I forgot to bring my swim trunks." "Don't worry, there's no one here. I often swim naked here myself," the woman confessed. "Oh no, I forgot to lock the gate." Concern appeared in the woman's eyes, and she hurried toward the house. "That's even better," thought her son-in-law, and taking off his clothes, dived into the water. As he swam, he couldn't stop thinking about his mother-in-law's remark that she was bathing here naked. What did she mean by that? Did she mean something special, or was it just a casual remark? He wondered. Finished bathing, he got out of the water and lay down on the grass. A few minutes later, he was completely dry and hurried toward the house. Ashley was still working in the garden. "Enough work. Let's get you swimming too." "Yeah, I was just getting ready when you got here." Soon the woman headed back to the river, and Mark decided to stop by the nearest store to get something to drink for the evening. Selecting a bottle of whiskey, he decided to waste no time and took a big gulp straight from the bottle. The drink burned his empty stomach, and Mark immediately had the mischievous idea of secretly watching his mother-in-law. Quickening his pace, he quickly made his way to a familiar spot. He was just in time to see Ashley slowly emerge from the water, shimmering in the sunlight. She was indeed swimming completely undressed. It didn't take long for her to find herself under the watchful eye of a familiar man. Her brother-in-law watched intently as the mature woman basked in the warm embrace of the sun's rays. "Well done," he quietly praised, taking another sip from his bottle. Over the next 30 minutes, the woman took 2 more graceful dips in the water, attracting the attention of his son-in-law, who discreetly cast glances at her. He felt a mischievous excitement akin to that of a teenager peeking at adults. As Ashley began to dress, Mark quickly turned and headed toward the house. However, In his moment of reverie, he inadvertently stepped on a dry branch, giving away his presence. Although his mother-in-law paid no attention to his approach through the bushes, she unmistakably sensed that she was not alone in the clearing. The woman returned home to find her son-in-law waiting for her at the table. He arranged glasses and snacks, showing that he was patiently waiting for her arrival. The mother-in-law appreciated the gesture, as she herself liked to have a drink before going to bed. As he continued to drink, he couldn't help but stare at his relative. Perhaps, he thought, it wouldn't hurt to try it, just once. With newfound determination, he turned the conversation to more intimate topics. To his surprise, Ashley gladly embraced these discussions, not shy in her choice of words. Can you believe it? Someone actually spied on me at the river today, and while I was swimming. Even an old lady like me can attract someone's interest. Oh, please don't talk about yourself like that. You are not old at all, but a very pretty woman. Do you really think so? Her mother-in-law asked, her eyes full of hope. Absolutely, in fact. I must confess that it was I who peeped. Mark, did you? Why? Well, I must confess, I've always admired you. Of course, I've liked you before, and this is such a great occasion. To look at the beautiful things. You flatter me. Hearing these words, the woman felt a sense of shame and realized that her son-in-law had been watching her for a long time. You know what? I no longer wish to remain a mere spectator. I wish for something more. Mark sat down next to his mother-in-law, and to the surprise of the annoying relative, she made not the slightest attempt to prevent him from gazing at her. As on the riverbank, they had no need of outer clothing. The next day they forgot all about the harvest, preferring it to a more exciting and enjoyable activity. As Mark drove home, all he could think about was how good he had been in the village, and he enjoyed peeping. Now he could not be forced to go to the village. He would go himself as soon as the opportunity arose. The whole summer was still ahead, and he and his mother-in-law would spend a lot of time on the river. Story number 3. My name is William, and I am 25 years old. At the age of 23, I got married and started living a typical, ordinary family life. I went to work, came home, and also helped my parents in the vegetable garden. But one day, my wife had to leave for a week for work in another city. I said goodbye to her and came home. It was Saturday, my day off. My mother-in-law called me in the morning. She was a single woman of 42 and looked quite attractive with her slender, long legs and well-groomed figure. It was evident that she was investing her hard-earned money in herself and used to be involved in athletics. She greeted me and asked if I could take her to the garden that evening as her car had broken down. I agreed without hesitation. I dropped her off at the garden that evening and headed home. As soon as I drove out of the apple orchard, I got a phone call. It was my mother-in-law, informing me that she had a few more crates of apples to pick and was worried that she would miss the last bus. Being the model son-in-law that I am, I agreed to help her. When I returned, I entered the house and sat down in a chair. My mother-in-law kindly gave me tea and then went to the garden to pick apples. After finishing my tea, I went outside for a smoke. The weather was scorching, so I took off my shirt and saw my mother-in-law standing on a small ladder picking apples. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed watching her as she slowly picked the apples and bent over to put them in the crate. She was wearing old, tight-fitting pants that girls call leggings. I went into the house and stayed there for another hour. When my mother-in-law returned, she was covered in dust and sweat. "William, can't you wait another half hour?" "I need to take a shower or I won't be able to clean up at home," she said. "Sure," I replied. It was the time when the hot water was shut off for 2 weeks in the summer. I went outside for a smoke while she changed into a light summer robe. Random thoughts swirled around in my head. My mother-in-law came out of the house in a short robe that barely covered her prettiest. She sat down next to me and lit a cigarette. "I hope I'm not disturbing you too much," she said. "No, my wife is away, and I'm bored at home." "I enjoy spending time with you," I replied. That's how I'd look at you all day." She smiled and said good, then headed for the shower. As she left, different thoughts began to cross my mind. I knew there was a slit in the shower room that I could peek through and see my mother-in-law bathing. I realized that this was wrong. At a loss, I pondered what to do. I had always hated people who liked to do it, despising the very thought of it. But there was a part of me that said, "Let's go. It'll be something to remember." While I hesitated, my mother-in-law got out of the shower, got dressed, and went back into the house. Without entering the house, I told her I would wait in the car. She locked the door and joined me in the car, saying, "Well, let's go home." I nodded silently, and we drove off. All the way home, we listened to the radio in silence. We were both thinking about something. I was thinking about the fact that it seemed that fate had brought us together here and left us too, with a hint of, well, do something. I often watch YouTube, there on my favorite channel, under the simple name Short Cheat Story. A lot of interesting stories about mother-in-law and son-in-law. And almost all of them have happy endings. But here and now, in ordinary life, I drive in silence and irrevocably miss maybe my only chance to get closer to my mother-in-law. Life, as it happens, is complicated. At that moment, I had a simple but brilliant idea. I suddenly said, "There's a YouTube channel called Short Cheat Story." To my surprise, my mother-in-law replied, "That's actually my favorite channel." I was shocked. "I even know the creator of that channel. I can introduce you to him." Excited, I suggested, "Since we both like this channel, why don't we grab some wine and head over to your place?" "I agreed," replied my mother-in-law. Together, we immersed ourselves in memories of YouTube channel videos, laughing and joking like teenagers. My mother-in-law put her hand on my knee, signaling to both of us that an evening of exciting events and exploration lay ahead. All thanks to the Short Cheat Story channel. Story number 4. I think many people have faced a serious problem, and that is their mother-in-law. I am sure you can relate yourself to such people. This woman seems to always find something she doesn't like, which leads to frequent arguments. My wife, on the other hand, doesn't like conflict and is generally good-natured, so we rarely fight, unlike her mother. At one point, however, my wife suggested that I talk to her mom to improve our relationship. I thought, okay, I've had enough of this situation. It's time to take action. After finishing work, I bought flowers and went to her house. Standing outside her apartment, I pressed the doorbell, mentally preparing myself for the worst-case scenario. To my surprise, when the door opened, I hardly recognized my mother-in-law. She had styled her hair, done her makeup, and even wore a nice dress. I was used to seeing her in a more casual look, although I knew she worked in an office where strict attire was required for high-level meetings. For a moment, I thought I was speechless at what I saw, but then I regained my composure, greeted her, and handed her a bouquet of her favorite peonies. I found it odd that she accepted them calmly, smiling instead of her usual smirk. While she arranged the flowers in a vase, I headed into the apartment, anxiously awaiting her return. When she finally joined me, I couldn't find the words, and the only thing that escaped my lips was a compliment about her beauty, perhaps even surpassing that of her daughter. In reply, she brushed aside my flattery and inquired as to the reason for my visit. Without hesitation, I confessed that I desired reconciliation. I expressed my weariness at the constant arguments between us. I assumed that she too was tired of these conflicts. She looked at me and said, "You know, I am not as young as you. These constant quarrels are undermining my health. Why do you need all these conflicts? You're acting like a child, always joking around with me, aren't you?" I lowered my eyes, realizing that she did have a point. I didn't believe that her behavior towards me was only due to those jokes. Nevertheless, I decided to admit my guilt in order to resolve the situation quickly. I uttered the words, "I apologize." However, she indifferently stood up, turned away, and curtly replied no. She said that was not enough. Then I got upset, stood up and asked, "Why?" She crossed her arms and remained silent. I walked over to her, put my arm around her shoulders, and turned her around so that we were face to face. She looked at me with wide open eyes. Unable to think of anything better to do, I decided to kiss her. As she pulled away, she remarked that I was on the right track, but a kiss alone wasn't enough to reconcile us. Realizing her words, I took her hand and led her to the bedroom. After a long and sincere apology in bed, all she said was, "Our reconciliation has been extended for a week. Come back sometime for another apology. There will be no quarrels now. I am satisfied, my wife is satisfied, and my mother-in-law is now the happiest woman in the world. She has other desires now. There is no time for quarrels." Story number 5. One day, while enjoying a swim in the city pool, I unexpectedly ran into Miss Harris, my mother-in-law. She appeared before me, radiating beauty and grace, completely oblivious to my presence, strolling along the side of the pool. I was surprised to find that she enjoyed swimming too. Instead of greeting her immediately, I decided to quietly observe her. Because of the constant conflicts between my wife and I, we rarely had the opportunity to spend time together. After giving birth, my wife struggled with being overweight, which took a toll on her self-esteem. Her mother scolded her and insisted that she take exercise classes to lose the extra pounds. At the same time, my wife seemed to do nothing but eat to her heart's content and get into arguments with her mother and for being overweight. She envied her mother's ability to keep herself in good physical shape. Mrs. Harris, though only 45 years old, looked much younger, perhaps no older than 40. The limitations of my mother-in-law and me socializing became apparent when I ran into her at the pool. It became obvious why my wife was preventing us from socializing, as her mother was superior in every way. However, she did not want me to make such comparisons, especially in favor of her mother-in-law. My mother-in-law strolled gracefully by the water's edge, completely oblivious to my presence. She is behaving in a funky manner, fully aware of the admiring gazes of the men around her, including me. I couldn't help but observe her. Her figure is flawless, a flat stomach without a hint of fat, a slim waist that resembles the waist of a young girl. Her legs are slender, her thighs firm, with no signs of flabbiness. Her skin is flawless and her legs are well groomed. I always pay attention to a woman's feet. Smooth heels and pedicures are a must for me. When I looked further, I couldn't help but admire her appearance. The swimsuit perfectly emphasizes her virtues. I found myself captivated by her attractiveness and was grateful that she didn't notice my gaze. She seemed calm, unaware that her brother-in-law was discreetly watching her from the water. She entered the pool and swam leisurely, giving me the opportunity to discreetly prolong my observation. I tried not to make her uncomfortable, wanting to savor the moment. Eventually, we began to swim laps together, with me following closely behind her. I kept a distance that allowed me to admire her while remaining unnoticed. After 20 minutes, I decided to greet her. I dove under the water and surfaced right in front of her, causing my mother-in-law to flinch, waving her arms and legs in surprise. Recognizing me, she smiled warmly. While we swam next to each other, having banal conversations, my swim trunks started a fire. After my wife finally saw something decent, I had a strong urge to hug my mother-in-law, but refrained from doing so, at least for the moment. I decided to assess the situation. A man always knows when to act and when not to. Women are always sending signals, and you have to be quick to pick up on them and react when they give you the green light. Still, I felt anxious, worried that I looked stupid. I was determined not to disappoint her, so we began to play. I began to duck under her, appearing from unexpected directions. She was enjoying the game. A few times I managed to run my hand down her thigh. What soft skin! We swam the fastest to the edge. I feared that my desire would be noticed by my swim trunks. I looked around, but there was no one I knew in the pool. There was no one to tell my wife that I was playing with her mom. No one knows us. We don't know anyone either. You can do anything you want. So I invented a new game. I crawled under my mother-in-law and crawled out so I could put her around my neck. I didn't get it right the first time, but I did it. I rode her on my shoulders, almost went crazy realizing she was sitting on top of me. Clearly, I could feel her warmth with my neck. Even the water didn't bother us. Then we used the special swimming boards that were stored in the corner. My mother-in-law took one of the boards and started kicking her feet in the water. I positioned myself behind her, on top of her, as if helping her, and I already felt that I could not bear it. Every fiber of my being was on fire. Even though I was submerged in the water, it was as hot as a sauna. We swam back and forth, and I grew more and more worried. What if I couldn't find a place to pin my mother-in-law against the wall? What would I do then? I couldn't follow her into the locker room or the women's shower room. I would definitely be kicked out of there. It would even cause a commotion among the women. We retreated to the farthest corner of the pool, to the most private place. There was no one resting on the edge of the pool. Thus, my mother-in-law and I remained in the safest corner, so to speak. My mother-in-law was tired of swimming. I realized that she wanted to go up the stairs and sit down on a bench to rest. So I suggested to her, "If you want, you can wrap your legs around me. I'll support your weight and you can take a break." My mother-in-law pondered the situation briefly before giving her consent. "Very well," she declared. "Just don't fool around." "What are you implying?" "I'm a grown man," I replied, though inside I was trembling. Outwardly, I managed to keep my composure. She wrapped her slender legs around me, and we floated on the water. She began to arch her back, creating ripples with her hands. I felt my sanity slipping away. As she arched her back, I found myself unable to resist. The situation was unfolding almost spontaneously, beyond my control. It was a tense moment. My mother-in-law shrieked, her eyes widening with embarrassment. She couldn't understand what had just happened. She shouldn't have teased me to begin with, though. It was her own fault, pretending to be a good mermaid. Despite the initial confusion, we quickly regained our composure and swam back to shore, heading for the showers. I was overcome with nervous excitement. Even my teeth were chattering. I couldn't accurately gauge my mother-in-law's emotions, as I am not versed in psychology. According to my friend, she must have been pleased as she was lonely. After taking a shower, changing my clothes and drying my hair, I headed to the lobby. My mother-in-law was still absent. I poured myself a cup of coffee and decided to wait for her in the chair. She came out of the women's locker room with a relaxed gait. Her face radiated joy, devoid of any embarrassment. I genuinely admired her. She looked so graceful and beautiful. We got to talking, and I ordered her a coffee. We sat together for a while and then said goodbye. When I got home, I was greeted by my indifferent wife. She opened the door and asked how my swim in the pool went. I told her it went well. "I met your mom." My wife's eyes widened in surprise. "Does she come to the pool often?" she asked. "Yes," I confirmed. My wife pressed her lips together as if sensing a rebuke. But I refrained from scolding her. Let her do what she wanted. I told her about my interactions with her mother to dispel any doubts I might have had. I had no secrets to keep. Throughout the day, my wife remained silent and disgruntled. I paid no attention to her silence. Eventually, she timidly asked me how it went. "Did you find her attractive in her swimsuit?" I pretended not to understand her question. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Did you admire her physique?" She continued to insist. I mumbled that I hadn't paid much attention to it. "Was that so?" my wife asked. "Naturally," I replied. "I'm not interested in looking at your mother. I go to the pool to swim, not to look at women." I pretended to be offended. If only she knew the truth about my time there. My mother-in-law didn't inform my wife about seeing me at the pool. I should have been worried. Planning to swim again next weekend, I anticipate my mother-in-law's presence and hope to join her in the pool. As I drifted off to sleep, thoughts of swimming, racing, and relaxing on the boards filled my mind. Next to me, my wife was restlessly tossing and turning and sighing, hinting at her expectations of our marital duties. However, I decided to put it off for another night.